Ah, good. Our jaunty guest has arrived. I'm so glad you could join us. The servitors and I were just discussing our next stop-off. The local nobility have made quite the luxurious purchase. 200,000 gallons of Carthenovan Amasec, at no less than the Gideon system. Oh, yes. Of course, it's a mere trifle for us, and little more than a detour, really, but it will give us a chance to see the sights of Gideon Primaris. Oh yes, a fine place indeed, well renowned for its finery and sophistication. Why, I myself can call its senior nobility to be among the greatest of the Imperium's courts. I have seen such fine gardens and... well, yes, we have not truly seen there yet as such, but I have read many a fine tome of the greater society papers dealing... well, I have watched the Imperial Society holotapes, of course. I can't recall which publication exactly.
Mechanicus Convocations on the safe operation of bread-burning devices.
No, that doesn't sound right. Mute for now.
Yes, sir.
Perhaps we may retire for the evening. I must prepare my correspondence to our illustrious patrons. Please enjoy the freedom of the ship. Constantine, I thought we had that bloody servo skull repaired. I can't have it going off every time we have a visitor. We're supposed to be projecting confidence. Wait, did you hear that? Oh, close the bloody door!
Welcome to your cabin. The following is a pre-recorded message from the most exalted magnificence of our honored shipmaster. Please pay close attention, and forward any inquiries to your hardworking, lowly, expendable servitor. Enjoy your stay. Emperor Damnus Inhibition Unit.
Welcome aboard, our honored guest, to the Ore Lennis, my stalwart Imperial vessel. If I may introduce my humble self, I am the shipmaster, Marcus Velus LuForge. I am a collector of artifacts, a purveyor of goods, and a preserver of stories and oddities from across the Imperium and beyond. Just keep that last part to yourself. Whether you be a passenger, a courier, or simply lost on your way from fleeing Ultramar, I hope this voyage finds you well. In your cabin, you will find all the necessities for your journey, including access to the ship's hololithic archives. Feel free to access some of its tales, but be warned, they don't call us rogue traders for nothing. After all, sometimes a well-crafted fiction can be easier to believe than the truth. Please also do excuse the vocal range of the Vox Servitor. It was acquired from a Magos of some questionable certification. I am fortunately ferociously busy at this time of decade. However, you may feel free to tour the ship at your leisure. Please do enjoy your stay.
Accessing archive file 202655142038. Initiate Vox Reminiscence Protocol.
Inquisitorial Detainment Facility, Mimus, M31-624, Sol System. With great effort he pressed his mind outwards and took in his surroundings. The cell was cold and barely lit by dim lumospheres. The thick bars covered in esoteric symbols lined his cell, which descended from dark holes in the ceiling. Carved into the sleek stone black walls and wrought in gold were imperial litanies of wrath and vindication. A large corroded cooling pipe ran parallel to the cell, from which a freezing gas emerged and crept along the floor. This in turn revealed red laser wires glowing and flickering by the passing mist. He pushed out further, perceiving a long corridor lined with other cells. The corridor reeked of desperation. Hideous to comprehend and demoralizing by design, the very walls ached with the echoes of misery and impotence. The essence of repenting, tortured psychers had been distilled and fed into the very stone. What horror it inspired. Were it not for his incarceration, he would have felt nostalgic. He pressed out further with his mind and began to strain, feeling a heavy resistance. He could not project into the other cells, but gathering his energy, he called out across the corridor with a sharp psychic screech, hoping to provoke a response from another inmate. But no response came, and instead the effort he exerted earned him an electrical discharge and the pulsing of a tube in his neck. He reasoned that this was an attempt to stupefy him, and while he tried to remain conscious, an intense throbbing pain broke his concentration. As he passed out, all he could hear was a low droning hum pressing against his mind. Regaining consciousness some time later, it became apparent to him that his gifts had been suppressed. Within his limited range of movement, the word-bearer tensed and physically examined his situation. He lay prostrated, his knees leaning forward, his ankles shackled hard to the floor. His back was arched, his arms pulled forward and held taut by derma-planted suture filaments. His wrists had been encased in a plasteel resin, and in a final indignity, his forehead had been seared with a branding iron, leaving behind scorched flesh in the shape of an inquisitorial icon. Across his body were symbols of allegiance and devotion to profane entities. Although these once deep skin carvings had been dulled from the acid wash that he had been subjected to upon his capture, their underlying potency remained. Through this, his skin seemed to ache and writhe from its proximity to the inscribed walls, as the unholy contrast of symbols clashed around the cell. Every angle of the prison was meticulously scanned by the surveillance skulls. Processed and buffered by thrice-blessed cogitators, their picked feeds and audio were further run through banks of vat-grown transcription servitors. Seeking some measure of control, and with an air of defiance, Bale began to intone a dark prayer. On the 4th day of the 2nd year, as I prepared for the harvest, 2 men approached the temple, bearing one gift of the high season of Rill in the... A siren wailed, and a dark red light swelled over his cell. A sustained discharge of cryonic gas persuaded him to stop. Above him, 4 dedicated servo guns embedded in the ceiling clicked and whirred as they observed his every breath. Hatches in the walls concealed gun servitors recessed within them, armed and ready to terminate the captive. Above him, a faint hissing began from a small vent, and with it came a gently falling yellow gas. Pooling near the floor, the vapor was lapping against his face like waves. It had a sweet smell that clung to the inside of his nostrils, encouraging deep inhalation. The vapor brushed gently against his face, landing and condensing, dripping off the end of his aquiline nose. Inviting and sweet at first, the odor soon became offensive as it congealed and grasped at the back of his throat, urging him to swallow. It disgusted him. His mind began to drift. And in this haze, he recalled his dreams, his deeds, his triumphs. He had been noble once, at least by the standards of his time. But that was before the greater revelation, the gathering of forces, the siege. And now he knelt, powerless, alone, brutalized, unmade by the most preening of sycophants. He tilted his neck low to observe what he could of himself. Across the underside of his arms were the remains of the unholy markings, and across his torso were a panoply of scars. Many of them were the sources of pride, past glories, while some were more recent acts of worship. But there were also fresh, mechanically precise cuts that his lolling head could barely discern. What had they done to him? He felt weak. At the end of a path of empty cells, an airlock at the top of the corridor opened, and a shaft of brilliant white light emerged, revealing the smooth, black obsidian floor of the cells. Behind the light stood the outline of a great tall figure, standing in full silvered battle plate. Ornate gold words of purity were embossed in the armour, with a plain white sackcloth rag draped across the right pauldron. To be within sight of this thing induced pain and disgust in the word-bearer. The creature must have been one of the Imperial Marines from the raid. He could sense the weak psychic imprint of his own rage, nestled but fading, tucked away in the rent in the Marine's armour. Bale had come so close to ending this creature when he had rammed the sacrificial blade into it. But his efforts had not been enough, and now this hideous presence was standing guard over him, apparently as part of some kind of convalescent duty. Vague glimpses of the room behind him revealed it to be a marvel of technology, with gleaming Baroque consoles connected to pristine silvered mirrors and scanning equipment. The room was fastidiously maintained, well ordered, and clearly more advanced than even the heights of the old Mechanicum. It was a shining example of what man could have been. For such beauty to precede this corridor of horrors was itself a monument to cruelty. Emerging from the light, a man entered the corridor. Smaller, human. He was dressed in a simple black robe and cowl, and wore a mask that mirrored its surroundings, in shifting patterns. Activating his data slate, the airlock behind him closed and cycled with a hiss, and the man approached Bale's cell. An odd sense of revulsion filled Bale's senses as his would-be interrogator stopped outside the cell, leering down at him through the mirrored mask. Malleus Bale, fallen warrior of the Emperor's 17th Legion. You now serve at the demand and whim of his Inquisition. You have been stripped of his blessings, and are sustained only by the grace of his Medicae. You will die here. Only you can control how much you suffer until then. Do you understand? A feeble laugh, and a particularly grotesque Colchizian curse replied. We begin. The interrogator pressed down a glyph on his data slate, and two spikes with red pulsing tips erupted from the walls with a hiss. They shot out and stabbed into the word-bearer's ribs. Screaming obscenities in vengeance, he convulsed in agony as his ankles rattled in their shackles. The spikes retracted after 34 minutes. You will answer my questions, then you will be sentenced for turning away from the Emperor's light, and for your crimes against the Imperium. The quality of your death will depend on your responses. The word-bearer was gasping, bloodshot, and hoarse from his own screams. His body ached and shivered with exhaustion. He mulled down over broken teeth. A Marine's physical conditioning should have been able to endure this. Through sheer spite, he raised his head to stare up at the interrogator. You may feel weaker than you expected. You are close to mortal again. Extracting the carapace may account for some of your current vulnerability. And now with your single heart, it seems that only the Medicae feeds maintain you. Bale continued labouring to breathe, trying to regain whatever strength he could. The interrogator looked on through his mirrored glass visor. Seeing his own reflection and what had become of himself, Bale reared up in his restraints and stared silently at the interrogator. It has been confirmed that during the Siege of Terra, you led a raid into the Librarium Astra of the Norlandic Heights, and that you later abandoned the other traitor marines and absconded with a number of censured texts. Some of the scrolls were recovered during your capture at Valandra Cor Segmentum Obscurus, subsector Delphi. Through frothing teeth, the word-bearer hissed. The gods see you too, little man. They know all of you, and they too are waiting for you. There are no gods, word-bearer, and no warp-spawn scum are able to peer in here. The droning hum on the edges of his mind drew Bale's attention again. With a sense of shock, he mouthed, A Geller field? Yes, localized around this facility. Pathetic barriers to hide behind. Barriers that protect the mind of the righteous man from becoming corrupted and debased like you. The term is enlightened. Then enlighten me, word-bearer. Where are the remaining scrolls?
They are reclaimed, liberated from the secret vaults of the galaxy's greatest tyrant. And would you believe the lengths he went to keep us in line? Were you brave enough to read them yourself? He who would raise humanity up, yet deny us our greatest tools. So yes, I took them, in the hopes of redeeming some of the lies upon lies.
Where did you take them? The interrogator rolled his thumb over the edges of his data slate.
I left the cataloguing to the peasants, of course. One need not take such duties to one's own self, but rather better, like him, to have slaves to do so. Like you, who, knowingly or otherwise, slave beneath him, even in death, from his writhing throne of filth.
The interrogator adjusted a dial on his data slate and depressed another glyph. The shrieking of the spikes intensified and fired more convulsive agony along every dendrite of Bale's body. The Medicaid tubes flexed and pumped, delivering liquefied drugs intended to keep the Marine strong enough to endure his torment. This continued for 51 minutes. Ah, Constantine. By the grace of the Emperor, we have arrived at the beautiful Gideon Primaris, jewel of the sector, home of the honest, reliable trader. Constantine, open a private Vox chat, please, and patch me through to the Merchants Guild of House Proctor. Hive Honorius, please. Hello. Yes, dear sir, shipmaster LuForge here. We have your consignment. 200,000 gallons of Carthenovan Amasec. Pardon, sir? Lee Tears? No, sir, gallons. The Emperor's finest. What do you mean you ordered in metric? This is the bloody Imperium of man! We use Imperial measurements for God Emperor's sake. What the bloody hell am I going to do with all this leftover engine degrease? What do you mean, just hawk it to Fenris? Have you any idea how quickly a space wolf will... Ugh, fine. Expect your shipment within the next solar day. Cease transmission. Bloody backwater. Peasant world. Poverty-stricken orc hole. Wait. Do we have any of those Motus pattern hip flasks left? Yes? Brilliant. Look, we can save this grok show. Just slap an Aquila on it, water down the Amasec, call it liberation juice, and sell it to the guard. For every grim nightmare gas cloud, there is an adamantium lining. It's a me, Inquisitario.